Yeah. Hemant Lagami Makwala, Gazalach Yalis. I come from the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation. Um, the Kwagyuls, Namgis, Mamtagila. I'm speaking here from Yalis or Alert Bay. Uh, do a lot of this work here with Snout from Sauk. So if we go through some of the slides and stuff, some stuff is going to be in Makwala and some stuff will be in Sinchothan. And it's important to acknowledge this work is done collaboratively with people from different nations and territories, respectfully. Uh, for me, a land acknowledgement isn't something to say one time and get over with. It's something. It's more than a statement. It's a call to action. That these indeed are Indigenous territories um, of Vancouver Island, including the Coast Salish, the Kwakwaka'wakw, and the New Channels. It's a catalyst for the web of change. The first stanza in true transformation, because if change is webbed, then achieving a truly meaningful change means working together, working with the Indigenous nations who have held sovereignty over these territories for thousands and thousands of years, as well as working with settlers and people who aren't Indigenous to the Americas, like the work that we're doing here. This discussion we're facilitating, it couldn't be done without the work done between nations and people like my colleague and friend here, Ascher Goodman, and the beautiful artist Julius, whose last name I will try not to butcher by not even attempting. So with that, yeah, let's take it off here. Hey,
Yeah, thank you and welcome to everyone. I see a lot of us are introducing ourselves in the chat. I would encourage that to keep going, and for everyone to also put the names of the lands they're on and the Indigenous nations whose lands they're on. So my name is Ascher Goodman, and I am a settler. I'm from Middle Eastern and European descent, and I'm currently on the lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I wanted to give a special shout out and welcome to the grade 4 and 5 students from Division 4 at Beech Grove Elementary. I was actually at your school yesterday. Good to see you again. And the grade 3-4 teacher or school at Robertson Elementary. So a special welcome to those and to everyone who's joining us here today. With that, we're going to pass it to Julius so we can get drawing.
Well, thank you very much, Makwala and Ascher. That's really wonderful to be a part of these always. I'm also, like Ascher, located in what today is Vancouver, but on the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I'm also a settler of European descent, so I'm very grateful to be here and grateful for the beautiful lands that have been protected for thousands of years by the Indigenous peoples here, and really hope to see this for so much longer. So, and that's why we're here partly, right? To learn about and to be inspired to care for this wonderful lands and the many creatures that live on them. So yeah, today we're gonna talk about an unusual one. Well, one that maybe hopefully a lot of people have seen, but representatives of this group, probably a lot of you have seen, is frogs, right? So frogs are amphibians, and amphibians are, their name, the amphi means both or dual, And bien comes from bios, which is life. So they have two lives. They live in the water and on land, right? They lay their eggs in the water. The tadpoles, they swim around in the water looking more or less like a fish for a while, and then they metamorphose into the adult form. In the case of frogs, these hopping, sometimes walking adults. And so we're going to talk about we're going to mention several species in BC here. But also we're going to specifically talk about the northern red-legged frog, which is Rana aurora in scientific terminology. So I'm going to share my screen here. And there we go. This hopefully is visible to everybody now. So yeah, this is a cute little frog that lives on the coast of North America. All the way from BC here to south through Oregon, all the way to California. And there are a couple of different subspecies of it. This one here is Rana aurora, so it's the northern one. Aurora, you might recognize from the term aurora borealis, or the northern lights. And so, but borealis is the part that says northern, so or that refers to or that means northern. So aurora is kind of referring to the glow. And in this case, this frog is interesting because it has a very bright, almost glowing looking underside to its legs. So the red-legged frog, that its name bears that or talks about that characteristic. If you look underneath the legs, they're bright red, and especially when it's an adult. And so this is one of the things that sets this beautiful frog apart. And so we're going to learn to draw this frog. And I've set up my digital workspace in the same shape and size as an 8.5 by 11 inch page. If you want to follow along with that, you can do it digitally too. But this works either way. And you can see on the right there, I have a colored version of it that I've drawn and painted before. That kind of gives you an idea of some of the colors, although there's some range in the coloration of these guys. They can be anywhere from olive-ish to kind of an olive brown, grayish, to a bright reddish brown on the back. But they all have this reddish colored underside to the legs and on the sides of the body. And we're actually going to be drawing the one on the left there, just to kind of get a little bit of a different pose than you normally see in frogs. I find frogs to be relatively challenging to draw, so this is kind of a fun exercise. We're going to be able to show off its long legs. As you know, frogs use their legs to jump, to hop around, to move on land when they are on land. And these are also really effective paddles in the water. They can push really powerfully through the water with these legs and these paddles, the ends of the feet being often webbed like they are here. Hey, so what I'm going to do is we're going to first turn off the sort of the preview drawing here, and I'm going to turn on a layer that I'm going to use for drawing. Now, so some of the time, I'm going to be drawing like with regular sort of hard, heavier tones. Other times, I'll let you know if you want to, keep an area light or erase out an area. So if you're using a pencil, it's great. If you're using a pen, that's fine too, because some of these lines that we're using to practice shapes are okay to leave in place. But if you can erase out some parts afterwards, I'll let you know, and that's even better. In any case, so let's get started drawing the northern red-legged frog and talking about this fascinating little amphibian that lives here. I've personally not seen one actually, but I hope to. And then if you are in the forests, especially in streams and forests, you can look for them and see if you can find some. That would be really nice. So I'm going to start here. What we want to do is you want to take your page and, you can orient it either way, either, portrait or landscape, vertically or horizontally. It doesn't much matter. The main thing is that we're going to start in the sort of the middle top part of it. So you want to make sure that you leave enough space on the sides so that we can have enough space for the entire frog. As you saw, its leg is going to hang quite low. So this first shape, you want to start sort of not quite at the top of the page, but not far from the top. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw what's going to be the body of the frog, sort of the abdomen, as we call it. And this will have also the tip of where the tail would. We're going to draw kind of a shape, shall we call this? Almost like if you would take a triangle and you kind of push out the sides, so they're rounded, kind of like that. So we're going to make a little, almost like a U shape here. Rounded and with a little bit of a tip. This part we're getting to right here is actually going to be where the tail is. Then go back up, and this is going to be the back of the frog. Okay? And then you can, maybe with lightly here or with dotted lines, I'm just going to complete this shape here just so that it's easy to see how it connects, but we don't need that line ultimately. So that's why I'm saying to draw that light. It's just kind of, you don't really need that line up there actually. But that's that little thing. You don't have to draw this, but that here, that's the tip of where the tail would be. So now in tadpoles, in young frogs, that's where the tail would have started and would have been full length. And as you know, tadpoles, which I'm just going to draw a quick little sketch of one. Don't worry about drawing this here, but tadpoles typically have a big head with a mouth here and a big eye. And then they have a body that comes out the back here. And then there'll be like a little limb here in the front that becomes the front legs. And then there's a long tail, right? With a fin on it. Looks like an eel almost, like a short eel. So when they're young, they look like that. But then as they grow, as they age and get larger, this front limb starts to look more like a leg, like a front leg. And then they start to grow out these little hind legs. And as they grow, these get bigger and bigger. The legs look more like frogs' legs. And then the tail gets shorter and shorter, right? It actually, it's a process that we call resorption. It actually grows smaller because the body is effectively almost like eating up the parts that made it up. It reuses, recycles all of the elements and molecules that were in that tail and uses that for growth. And so it resorbs the tail. It basically ungrows the tail, if you like. It doesn't fall off. It uses up the material. So frogs can teach us about recycling and reusing, even that way. And then it becomes shorter and shorter until there's no tail left on the animal. So anyway, that's how frogs metamorphose from tadpoles. Metamorphose meaning to change from tadpoles into their adult form. Okay, so that is kind of a quick little life story of most frogs. There are some interesting exceptions to that, but that's particularly one of the examples of how this frog grows. Okay, so that is our body, and that's where the tail will be. So now we're going to continue and add a shape that will stand for basically the head. So here we're going to start at the top left corner of this shape, almost like an acorn shape that we made. This one's going to be a bit longer and narrower with a little bit of a point on it as well. I'm going to start like this and go up. This is going to be the snout of the frog at the tip here. Frogs have large heads compared to their body, compared to most animals. And then it goes all the way back here and almost touches the other shape. You see there's a little bit of a divot there, a little bit of it dents in slightly. That's just something I'll call your attention to, just slightly. It doesn't quite make it all the way to the first shape that we drew. So that doesn't look like a frog now, but trust me, it's going to look more and more like a frog as we go. We need eyes, right? Right from the beginning, when they're tadpoles, they already have eyes because they swim around and eat small insects, invertebrates in the water. So they need eyes to be able to see, to hunt their prey, and to escape predators. So we're going to draw the frog's right eye first. Going to make a small sort of, kind of like a lemon shape, ovalish shape, right around here near the tip of the snout, like that. And we can add the pupil, or that black spot in the center of the eye through which the light actually enters the eye. And this shape of the pupil is not round, not circular. It's roundish, but it's oval shaped, and it's oval shaped in a way that it's sort of a flat oval, like the longer part is side to side. Not all frogs are like that. In fact, there's one species of frog in BC that has these vertical pupils like a cat. And so the material that we're going to compile for this lesson will have some links that show you many species of frogs in BC, and you'll see that in some of them, or at least in one of them. If you're out and about in BC's wilds and the forests, streams, and pond areas, you'll see up to around 13 to 15 kinds of frogs in the province of BC, depending on where you are. And now 3 of them that have been seen here are actually what we call exotic or introduced. That means that they didn't initially live here, but were introduced here by either human activity, or they kind of expanded their range and then kind of moved into our area from the south, for example. And so things like the green frog or the American bullfrog are not originally here in BC, but there are at least 12 or 13 species that are native to here. And the northern red-legged frog is one of them. So that's the left, or the right eye of our frog. The other thing about frogs in general, and about this one is a good example, is that their eyes are situated on the top of their head and they stick out of the head. They bulge out. And what we can see here is that if we draw from this eye just on the inside, on the inner side of it, this kind of a little U shape like this, that represents the place where the way that the eye kind of stands up. So if you were to look at the head from the front, you don't have to draw this, but I'm just going to draw a view of the head from the front. If you were looking at it face on, okay, so the mouth here, and then the eyes would kind of come out like this. Oops, that was a little bit of a computer error. There we go. The eyes would come out like this. Oops, like there. Okay, and then you can sort of see the front. And frogs are neat because their eyes are so in that sense almost like periscopes, like on a submarine, and they stand up and they can see in a lot of directions at once. Partly that long pupil, the black area, helps because it lets light come in from all around them. That's really important if you have a lot of animals that want to eat you. And frogs are, in fact, very important in ecosystems as being a source of food for many animals. But they have to try to protect themselves. And one of the ways they do that is by being able to have this wonderfully wide vision all around them. Their eyes point out sideways, but light can come in from all around, almost on both sides. And the shape of their eyes really helps them to be able to take in their entire environment. And the eyes being on top of the head is useful because they can sit floating on the surface of the water, and their eyes can stick out above, but their body is hidden under the surface of the water. So they can see above the water for any danger, but they can also still stay fully in water to keep their skin moist. They don't have scales. They have this moist skin that needs to typically be moistened by water. So there you go. So that's why their eyes kind of look that sort of funny way that they do. Now we have one eye on our frog, but we're going to add another one on the left side of the frog, like this. So that's the eye that's facing the other way. We can't see the pupil there, but we can see that a little bit of that the edge where the eye merges with the head. And in fact, if you want, you can erase out that line of the head, or you know, if it doesn't erase, that's fine, but you can erase out that line of the head here because we're not going to really need that because that's the eye kind of sticking out of the head. So now we have 2 eyes on our frog here. And we're looking at our frog kind of from above and from its right. So we're seeing a lot of its back this way. So now what we're going to do is start to put legs on it. So this is the full-grown frog. It has full-size legs, unlike in a tadpole that lacks the legs. This one has long legs that it can hop with. These are powerful. So the first thing we're going to do is start with the right hind leg. And this one is going to have this really big, meaty thigh. So you're going to draw a shape that is kind of like a big piece of rice kind of thing, I guess. 2 rounded shapes. One starts out at near the tail, actually right from the part of the tail here where there would be a tail. There's no tail now. We're going to come down and curve like this. They've got big thigh muscles. And then the other line almost meets it from the top and comes down like there. And it ends there at the knee. So that's the frog's knee is where it would be. Okay? So that's the thigh of the right leg. Actually, I'm just going to, you don't have to, I'm just going to fix this because I would normally want it just a wee bit skinnier, but that's okay. Yeah, as artists, we do a lot of sort of fixing of our work as we go. You can do that too if you want. You don't have to because that was a pretty close one, but I tend to be a stickler for accuracy, so I try to get things as right as I can. In fact, you can also, up here at the base of where the tail would have been, you can, if you're able to erase out a little bit of that line that the body made initially, because we don't need that really. That's where the leg joins the body. Okay? Now we're going to have to give it another leg on the other side, right? Now these legs are wonderfully flexible. They can go all the way from the front, like pointed forward, so that when the frog is resting, it can fold up its legs under its body, and it can just be a very compact little shape. Or they can be fully extended like a right leg in its sort of the powerful thrust backward when it's hopping or swimming through the water. But this other leg is going to be tucked in under the frog. So we're going to start near the tail again, and we're going to make this curved shape that comes up like this and just hooks around at the knee and back toward just behind the body. So we can't see most of this leg. We're seeing the top of the thigh, something like that. Then we, of course, need the front legs as well. Now, I mentioned we're seeing this frog kind of from the back, from above it, but also from its right a little bit. So we're going to keep in mind that we can only see the right side front leg. The front legs of frogs are much smaller, so it's easier for it to hide that little leg behind it when we're seeing it from one side. So we're going to draw a similar shape to the thigh, but smaller and more toward the front. So remember that gap we left at the head? Well, that's where we're going to start. We're going to draw down like this for the front part of the leg, and then start from near that beginning part and make another line for the back side of the upper arm. Okay? So that's the upper arm of the right arm of the frog. So these are small, right? They don't use these arms for their powerful locomotion or movement. They hop around using their back legs, but the arms are useful for a couple of things. They help to push the frog up from the ground so that it can keep its head up. It doesn't need a lot of power for that. It helps to move it around, to clamber around on ground, sometimes when it's not hopping, but when it's walking. Some frogs actually use these legs to do push-ups when they're courting potential mates. When they are going to make tadpoles, they will make these special displays where they'll do these push-ups. Now, it's not this species of frog, but several species of frog do that. So their legs are actually used for courtship too. And their legs are sometimes used to hold down prey. So you've seen maybe photos of frogs eating earthworms sometimes. They'll hold down part of the worm with the front leg as they're chewing it up. So they're useful for manipulating their prey as well. They don't have to be very large for that, but they do need something in the front. Okay? So that is the upper arm of the front leg, the right side. Now we're going to do the forearm, which is like the equivalent of our forearm. And you're going to start at the elbow of that front leg and go forward, and it's going to be a curved shape like this, coming back to near the elbow again. Okay? That is the full upper and lower arm of the frog and the front legs on the right front leg. Again, the left one is behind it. But we also need fingers, right? So frogs are interesting in that they're different from us. Typically, frogs have 4 fingers on the front feet or on their hands, if you like. And they often don't have claws. A lot of them have these, some of them have claws, but a lot of them have sort of just like a finger that doesn't end in a claw or fingernail kind of a thing. And this frog is one of them. Some of them that climb trees, actually, tree frogs, have these suction cups or pads on their feet that allow them to stick to vegetation really well. This one is actually not a tree climber, so it doesn't have some of those great big pads, but it does have a wee bit of an enlarged tip at the tips of the fingers. So we're going to draw 4 fingers. And the other thing to keep in mind is that when this frog species is sitting on the ground, its fingers are actually kind of pointed a little bit inward toward the center of its body. So it's kind of an interesting way to sit. So I'm going to draw 4 fingers starting at the tip of the forearm, like this. The teeny bit of thicker at the tip of each. 2, 3, and 4, like that. Okay. And join back to the end of the leg. So there we have the complete front right leg of this froggy, and that is holding its body up from, let's say, it could be sitting on moss or on rocks or on soil. This species of frog actually lives in ponds, in slow-flowing streams, and they're often found in deep forest, in well-developed complex forests. So for this species of frog, that lives on the West Coast, we really need ancient forests, or sometimes referred to as old growth forests, that are not disturbed. The complexity of their environment is important because you need enough a mature forest to have enough prey for them to be able to eat, so the right number of insects and kinds, but also because where they select to live, what their protected areas, where they sleep or hibernate, they look for places, for example, under old, dead, downed logs that have fallen after they were alive. And so this complex landscape with a lot of these logs that are providing protective places for them to sleep, to hibernate in the winter, is important for them. And it also helps to keep the place cool and moist. A forest is really wonderful. If you ever walk through a forest, you'll know on a hot day how much it cools you off. And this is very important for this frog species because northern red-legged frogs are very sensitive to high temperatures. And to low temperatures, but especially important for our changing climate is the fact that as temperatures increase, it makes these frogs more susceptible to harm by high temperatures than most frogs. And so we need these nice, cool forest environments. We need intact forests for them, pristine, old growth, ancient forests. And so, oops, there we go. So anyway, that's some important points about the environment that we need to protect for this species, and many others as well. So now we're going to finish its right hind leg. And so we've finished up to the knee. We're going to draw what would be the shin or the calf of the frog. Okay, so we're going to go down from the knee, a little bit of a corner there, and then it goes about that long, about the same length, roughly the same length as the thigh. And then we're going to put the back of the leg here. There's some muscle here as well. So you'll see this bulging shapes, these sort of widened centers of these rounded parts of the legs are there because of the muscles that are inside. And you can actually see the muscles bulging when the frog is resting like this. And they're very powerful for, pushing the whole frog up through the air to leap. And it's effective for getting away from potential predators, for example. Now, the foot of the frog is also very long. This is useful because the foot and the toes are used for propulsion or for, pushing itself through water and on land as well. So this particular frog is standing in such a way that its foot is stretched out. So we're going to start where we ended the lower part of the leg and draw a line out like this. It's a little bit curved. And then from the back, from the heel, what would be our heel, the ankle, another line that comes down like this, slightly widening toward the end, right? Because we're reaching the base of the finger, the toes, sorry. And so those toes are spread out, as you saw from the preview drawing. And to show that, we're going to start with one toe first, the longest toe. So frogs have 5 toes on their hind foot. So unlike us, and if we count our fingers and toes, we have 20 in total, right? Typically, most of us are the typical sort of most common number is that. We can sometimes be more a different number. Some people have more toes and fingers, some have fewer. Sometimes we lose some toes and fingers. That happens to frogs as well. But most often, if you looked at counted people, you'd find about 20. In frogs, it's 18, 4 in the front on each foot and 5 in the back on each foot. Okay? So we're going to draw that longest one first. And we're going to start from the top of the foot and it's curving upward a little bit like this. And here we're going to have a little bit of a sharper point to it. And it's very narrow, the toe. So we're going to draw a line underneath it that is quite narrow and close to that first line, slightly wider toward the base where we started, like that. The reason it's kind of curved like this is that we've got this frog. Imagine it's sitting on, and I'm just going to draw a little bit around it. You can do this or you don't have to. It's up to you. You can decide what it's sitting on. I'm just going to make some moss here, just kind of around it. And it's a very rough sketch of moss. There are many species of moss, which are tiny plants, very interesting plants that exist in moist areas. Here we have a lot of different kinds in BC because it's typically quite wet. And frogs are often found sitting on moss. It's a wonderful way for them to keep their skin moist while being on land. And so here, these little tiny moss plants, which are larger compared to the frog because it's such a small animal too, only about that big, only about 4 to 8 centimeters long. It's sitting on this bed of moss. The moss might be growing on old wood, for example, that was downed, or on soil. So it might be an old log that the moss is growing on, or it could be right on soil at the edge of the water near a stream. And it's sort of, the frog is holding itself on the edge of this sort of slanted bit of moss, and it's using its long hind foot to kind of brace itself to keep itself from rolling down. So that's why we're kind of showing this frog with one leg outstretched. You could think of other reasons too, but that's my sort of reasoning for it. Now we're going to put the other fingers in place as well. Those other fingers are a bit shorter. One of them, kind of like the equivalent of our big toe, is actually a little smaller than that first toe we drew. And it's going to start for us above that other toe. So you're going to start again where that first toe began and make a little slightly curved line, not as long as the other one, but also narrow like this. And it goes back to join the foot. Then there are 3 other toes. They're also a little bit shorter than the longest toe, and then getting shorter toward the outside of the foot. So we're going to start at the bottom of that first toe, make another one here. This is less curved because now these toes are not experiencing the same kind of flexion or pressure from the ground. It's that big toe in the first one that are most pushing against the ground, but these ones are kind of resting on the ground behind. There's one, then the next one is shorter than that, coming downward, also very narrow. And then the last toe is a little one. It's kind of like our pinky or our little toe. Same thing on this frog. It's also the littlest one. See? So there are the 5 toes on the right leg of the frog. The other thing that we want to highlight here is something that you can use actually if you happen to see one of these frogs in the wild to help distinguish it or tell it apart from a closely related other kind of frog. So there are some frogs called Oregon spotted frogs, which are in the same genus. They're also in the genus Rana, which is a part of the scientific name, but it's a different species. It's closely related to it. But one of the differences is that in that species, there's webbing between the toes that goes all the way to the tips of the toes. But in our species that we're drawing today, the northern red-legged frog, that webbing goes only part of the way toward the toes. And what do I mean by webbing? Well, between the toes, this is a wonderful evolutionary adaptation that allows them to be more powerful swimmers in the water. And this is one of the features that you see in a lot of animals that swim. Between the toes, there's this membrane or skin, basically, that connects the toes. It's very flexible and stretchy. So we're going to start between that little toe and that second last toe, and we're going to draw a little line, not quite from the tips, but about halfway down each, that connects them. It's a thin membrane, thin kind of like a flap of skin that connects the toes. And why is this important? Because when it's in the water, if it were to push against the water, if you push against the water with your hand, you notice that you get some resistance, right? It's harder to push. But if you were to close your hand, like cup it, or to add, let's say, put something that connects your fingers, like you hold a plate or something, and push against the water that way, you'll notice it's a lot harder to push because you're pushing against water with a lot more surface. And it's the same reason for frogs, that they can push through more of the water. They're actually pushing more water by filling in the space between their toes. And by pushing more water, you're generating more thrust, you're generating more pressure to push your body through the water. And that's what frogs do using their webbing. We're going to draw that second web between the second last toe and that third toe. You see here, the webbing only goes part of the way down, and it ends before you reach the toe tips. That's an important distinguishing feature for this species. And then again, from that toe to the next one, it only goes that far, about halfway. And then just barely visible is the last web component between that longest toe and the first toe. So you can see that they don't go quite to the ends, just like which something that differs from the Oregon spotted frog. So something that you can learn to distinguish them because they look similar otherwise. And so these are really useful for kind of like penguins use their modified wings as flippers to push through the water. Frogs use their hind legs to push through the water. So it's kind of a similar solution, but using a different body part. So now we're going to also draw the foot on the other side, the left leg. Okay? So we drew the thigh on the left side, which is, remember, that leg is going to be tucked in under it. And because it's tucked in under it, we can't actually see the lower leg, the calf or the shin. Instead, what we see is that as it's tucked in, the foot, the heel of the frog is visible behind and then moving forward toward the foot. So it goes out from near the tail point. And we're just going to draw this line that is kind of parallel to, almost right next to part of the thigh, about halfway up. Okay? So that's kind of like the underside of the foot, kind of like for us, before you reach the toes, are the sole of our foot. They generally don't walk on that part so much, but they also don't walk often very much. They rest on it though. We also then need toes on that side. Now, here's a bit of an artistic bit of a tip. If you're drawing the toes in such a way that they're pointing away from us, sort of, and you're not seeing them flat on, then we have this phenomenon called foreshortening. That means that we're seeing something only sort of from not face on, but from an angle. And so that means what ends up happening is that the long objects look shorter than they would if you saw them face on. And so that's what's happening here, is our toes are not going to be quite as long as the other toes we drew. Not because they're actually different lengths, but because they were pointing a little bit away from us. So here we're going to go and start with a little toe on the outside, and then the next toe. You don't need as much detail here. You're only seeing them kind of pointing away from you, like this, and then one more. And remember, there are 5 toes, but we're only seeing 4 of them here because the 5th toe, the one that is on the inner side of the body, is actually hidden behind the knee of the frog. Okay? So there's an extra little line that I drew there I didn't need, but that's okay. Anyway, so that, I'm just going to fix up that last toe there because I had a little bit of an extra line there. Again, as artists, we often fix our work as we go like that. Anyway, that's how you would see the toes on that side. But remember, there's also webbing between the toes, as we talked about in the other one. And here, the webbing will be just barely visible again because it's also, on the foot that's facing away from us and is foreshortened. You're seeing the webbing again about halfway between to the tips of the toes. But you don't see all of the tips of the toes actually because they're a little bit pointed downward. They're kind of gripping the moss, right? So that's the part uphill on the moss as the frog is sort of holding on. And the other hand on the front would also be doing a similar thing. It's kind of pointed inward like the other one on the right, but it's also kind of pushing down on the moss to keep the frog sitting on the moss that's kind of tilted. Maybe the moss is growing on the side of a log, and the frogs are really effective at holding on to all sorts of different shapes of their environment. So the other thing that we're going to keep in mind about this frog, the northern red-legged frog, is that it has these ridges or folds of skin on its back. It's another distinguishing feature. Some frogs have these, some don't. And it's kind of like a bulge, a long bulge of skin along the back that helps you to identify what kind it is. It starts just behind the eye, and it continues all the way to where the tail would originate. So we're going to draw this line from the back edge of the eye on our side and follow along, and it goes up a little bit. I'll explain why it goes, because the back, I'll explain it now. The back is curved, so it comes upward, and then it kind of slowly curves back down and toward the tail like that. That's the bottom side of this ridge. This ridge is narrow, so we're going to draw the upper edge of this ridge just above that line a little bit. But as you're doing it, give it a little bit of bumpiness because this ridge is not totally smooth. It's a little bit bumpy. So it goes like this. We're going to draw a line very much like the other one, starting from the eye, from the back of the eye, and we're going to go back and follow near that first line, but give it a little bit more bumpiness as you go. They're not quite warty, these frogs, but they do have a little bit of bumpy skin. And this ridge, this thickened bit of skin along the back has a little bit of that bumpiness. Now, that's one of the two. It has 2 of these ridges, one starting behind each eye. And so on the other side, we're going to do a similar thing. But since we have already the back edge of the frog visible on that side, we're pretending that that is the top part of that ridge. So we're only going to draw the lower line. And we're going to start from behind that left eye and make a faint line just under the edge of the frog's back. And so you'll see that the back of the frog is curved and go all the way to the back like that. Okay, there are two ridges. The back of the frog is curved, and these two ridges also help to show how the frog's back curves up and then back down as you go toward the tail from the head. And in fact, frogs have sometimes, if you see them, from the side, they'll have this bit of so if I were to draw a frog from the side, you don't have to do this. Here's the head basically, the eye, and then toward the neck sort of area, not much of a neck really. And then the back goes up and then comes down toward the tail. The reason is that this area here, there's this sort of a peak. Not all, this may be exaggerated compared to most, but some frogs are like that. They have the bigger bones in here of their hips that help to anchor the muscles of their thick hind legs, the powerful hind legs, right? So those need anchor points, and this sort of peak in the back is where a lot of those bigger bones anchor some of the, or are used to anchor some of the muscles. Okay, and it also helps to give the frog a bit of volume for the internal organs. So that's kind of the weird shape of some frogs. It makes them sort of a little bit harder to draw sometimes, but if you know some of the common features, it makes it a little bit easier to draw them once you get some practice. Anyway, we'll continue with our main frog there. So there also, you can see from this angle, you can see that the frog has certain little furrows or little valleys in its surfaces where the muscles kind of meet. And so, for example, I mentioned for the hind legs, you can see the outline of the muscles kind of. They're powerful muscles. So if you were to draw a very light line, right, pretty much down the center of the thigh, on the right thigh, but slightly curved like this, that is kind of like a dip in the surface where the muscles of the leg that help to outstretch and to pull back at the knee, sort of the contours of the muscles basically. And then you can see a little bit of a line on the lower leg as well. Also, this frog has a bit of a valley or furrow on its back. It's sort of a dip, and you can draw that light line along the center of the back too. And again, you can see it's kind of curved because, again, the back of the frog rises before it dips down toward the tail. So now here's the other thing. This frog has a certain color pattern. Now, we aren't actually painting this in color today, but you can if you like afterward. But before we put the red in place, there are also some other markings that you see on the frog. And these are like dark black markings. There's speckles and stripes on it and certain features. So on the face, you'll see that there's this bit of a dark line. I'm gonna change colors here a little bit, just so that we can see that this is actually color markings rather than just the black lines. I'm going to make this brown or dark brown, because it can be black to dark brownish markings. So here we're actually going to, I'm just going to make a new layer for myself, make this from the tip of the snout, okay, back toward the eye. There's this is too red for me. I think that's too bright. I'm going to change this. I'm going to darken it almost black. It should be close to black. It could actually be black. That's fine. There's this little bit of a line from the snout right to the eye. And then there's a line that kind of continues through the eye, the colored part of the eye. And then it continues behind the eye and goes back toward the back of the head and then down to the base of the head like that. And there's actually a little bit of a coloring that happens, darker, not quite dark black, but a little bit of a darker than the background color right here. So there's that. You see this a lot in a lot of frogs. There's this kind of a mask. It's kind of useful, actually, when you think about it. Animals often have these lines that go through their eye. You see that in many species, birds, dogs, even wolves, for example, especially. You'll see these lines. Why is that useful? Well, when you're hunting, or if you're being hunted, it's useful to hide your eyes from your prey, for example. If you're hunting, if you're an animal that hunts other species, you want your prey not to see where your eyes are, because if your meal potentially can see where your eyes are, then it can maybe tell which way you're going to attack. If you can hide your eyes, and make it less obvious where they're located on your head, then it's easier to fool the prey into not knowing which way you're going to jump. Similarly, for prey species, for animals that have to watch out because they have predators, it's useful for them to hide their eyes, because then the animal that's hunting them might not easily be able to judge which way they're going to jump, because it's hard to tell where exactly the head is and which way it's pointed. So if you can hide your eyes, especially if your eyes are big, like in a frog, it's useful to kind of hide either if you're hunting or if you're being hunted. So these kinds of lines have purposes, and they're selected. There's natural selection that takes place, and then these evolve to help, basically, that end up helping the animals to survive in their environment, either to eat or to escape from being a meal. The other thing that these frogs have is these speckles around their body. Now, there's a lot of variation in the color patterns and color, sort of the hue, the color of these frogs, but there's a lot of speckles on their body, so you can just kind of put speckles all over, especially toward the hind legs here. Okay. And also some on their legs, like on the front leg here, there's little spotty speckles. Again, lots of variations. You can kind of modify this. And around the snout, there's little speckles around the snout on the top and bottom of the snout. They're smaller speckles. And then there are also sort of like bands or stripes on the hind legs, mostly toward the bottom. They're darkest toward the end of the leg. So we're going to start actually here. The foot, for example, there's some here. These bands cross the legs. Now, why could that be important in an animal? Well, when you have long features like legs or a tail, frogs don't usually have tails, but they have these long legs. Again, it's useful if you're being hunted by a lot of animals to try to get away by breaking up the outline of long features. So a long part of an animal might stand out against the background. It's like, it's easy to see long shapes, right? So if you can hide yourself by breaking up that contour of those long lines by bands that go in the opposite direction, that helps to make you less visible. This is the case for many animals. You see banded tails in a lot of cats, in many other types of animals with long features. It's a little bit different for zebras because they have bands too, but it functions sort of similarly, but there are other interesting things happening there. But for frogs, this is another thing, that their long legs often have these bands. And so that's useful actually to hide them in their environment, to make them less look like long features. So that's another thing there, fun. Now, one last thing we were going to do with this frog is we talked about how important they are in their ecosystem, how important they function both to support the animals sort of in a trophically above them. When I say trophically, I mean that there's a chain, sort of a food chain or a food web, which means that some animals hunt others, and those ones hunt yet other animals, and so on. And when we draw a sort of a graphic representation of how these animals eat each other, they form sort of what looks kind of like a pyramid in some cases. You have some animals at the bottom that eat, like for example, eat plants. There's a lot of different kinds. And then there are some groups of animals that eat those animals. There are typically fewer of those because they lose some energy when they eat. And so you don't get to use all of the energy contained in your prey to build your own body. So there are fewer of those animals. And then there are even fewer of the animals that eat those animals. And then even fewer of the ones that eat those ones. So there's this wonderful sort of hierarchy or stepwise kind of organization of the numbers of animals of different kinds that eat, and relating to how many kinds of animals are eaten below them. Okay, so these frogs are near sort of in the middle bottom of that pyramid or food web or food chain in some cases, if they're simple. There are many animals that eat them, like birds, mammals that eat them. And so these frogs are very important in the environment for helping to support these other predators. And the more of these links in this web there are, the more complex is the environment. And our West Coast rainforests are very complex environments. And so frogs are very crucially important to support the other parts of these environments. But they also eat other animals, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to show this frog eating. And specifically, we're going to show it catching an insect. Now, the neat thing about this is frogs have a mouth sort of on the underside of their face, right? Typically. And so in this animal here, you could either leave it like this and have your frog all ready to go, or you could give it a mouth that's eating. So when it's not eating, its mouth is kind of hidden from this angle. But we're going to show its mouth open, or you can if you want to. If we go beyond this, then it's going to be a frog that's eating. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to show its mouth open. And so this lower jaw swings out downward, and it is basically just comes out from the bottom of the head like this. And we're not actually going to connect it at the end. We're just going to give it a bit of a lip like that. Okay. And then there's another part of the mouth that's just visible open on. I'm going to zoom in to show you what I mean. Over here, you can see that the other part of the mouth is here. If we were to connect it, if we were to fully show the mouth open, it would be like this, basically. It's kind of tipped like the snout, right? But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually erase that part out. The reason is we're going to show it sticking its tongue out. And I'm just going to remove that moss there. Because frogs have this wonderful feature of a very stretchy, elastic tongue that they can flick out at high speed, right? And many species can shoot their tongue out so fast that they can catch insects in flight. Now, anybody who has had flies or mosquitoes flying around them and has tried to swat at them knows how difficult it is to actually hit one of them when you're trying to swat them away from you, because they're so fast when they fly. So then you can really appreciate how amazingly fast frogs' tongues are when they flick out. They're sticky to catch a fly and actually succeed while the fly is flying. So we're going to put a tongue on this frog as it's been extended. Actually, I'm going to remove a little bit more of that moss that I drew there initially because I want to make room for this tongue. And so here we go. The reason I drew that lower jaw sort of open at the tip is we're going to show the tongue sticking out, flicking out, and it's long and it kind of bends down. And here's a fun fact. Whoops, that's an extra bit. Didn't want that. I'll just redraw that. There's the top of the tongue. I'm going to draw the lower part, the underside of the tongue now too, sticking out from the tip of the mouth. Bends, and it's a little bit wider maybe at the tip. And a fun fact is that a lot of frogs, I don't know if you knew this or not, have a bit of a forked tongue. So the tongue ends like this, not as deeply as a snake, but it's forked too at the tip. That's actually kind of useful when you think about it, because it can help to wrap around some of the prey. So if it's shooting out, it's useful if it just sticks to the prey, right? Because it's a sticky tongue. But if it's a little bit forked, it can also potentially maybe wrap a little bit around the prey. And that we're actually going to show that. We're going to have a fly at the end of this that just caught, a flying fly that has just been snagged by the tongue. So I'm going to draw this fly. The head is kind of here. There's a bit of a round bit. It's got these big eyes like that. And then there's the thorax, or the middle part of the body. And then the abdomen, which is that third part of insects' bodies. And then the wings, one wing on the other side sticking out like this. It's outstretched because it was flying. And then another wing on this side that is kind of bent backward like that. You can have a couple of its legs maybe trailing out the bottom like this. No, they have 6 legs, right? So maybe we can see 3 of them on this side. And it's right at the end of the tongue. The tongue's actually just snagged it. You can, if you want to put veins on the wings, do that. It's complex, but it doesn't matter if you do or not. If you want to put markings on the back. Anyway, that's details. But that's the fly. And it's just been stuck to the end of the frog's tongue. And that frog is going to then pull its tongue back quickly into its mouth with the meal at the end. So this frog is hunting a fly. Actually, at this level of magnification, you can go back to the base of the mouth and sort of erase out a little bit of that line of the side of the jaw, and then just kind of make another wee bit of a line here where it's opening its mouth like that. And then if you want to, you can put a little corner edge on the tongue like this to show it's got some thickness. Optional. But anyway, there we go. I'm going to zoom out to full size. There's our frog, our northern red-legged frog. And one last thing, remember, if you were going to draw this in color, if you wanted to put the the red in place to make this characteristic if you wanted to color it afterwards. I'm going to switch to a red color here. And I'm just going to show you where that happens. You can't see some of it on this because it's underneath the legs typically, but you can see some of the red around here on the edge of the leg because it's mostly under it. We're seeing the upper side of the leg, but it kind of wraps a little bit around. I'm actually going to put that under this part here so it's easier to see. And then on the underside of the thighs and on the underside of some of the lower part of the leg, you can see that bright red. So you can see a little bit of it wrapping around here, but we're mostly seeing the top part of the leg, so you're not seeing as much of it. And there's some of that red that continues onto the side of the frog. Goes a little bit forward like this, and it fades out toward the front. And then the underside of the belly of the frog is typically whitish. So the legs underneath are red, but the underside of the rest of it is whitish. And again, this is a brighter red, and again can be used to help distinguish it from a close relative that we talked about, the Oregon spotted frog, which has a more orangey color to the underside of its legs. But that's a good example of our frog hunting in the nice moist woodlands of our rainforests here on the West Coast. Its range follows these rainforests quite well, living in really nice untouched forest. There are some things that can disturb the populations of these frogs and endanger them. In BC, this is what is known as blue listed. Our government has recognized that this frog is in some trouble, so there's a code that they use to identify different animals and plants that face threats. In this case, this frog, for example, faces threats like the development of cities. Urbanization is what it's called. In many places, including in Vancouver, they've actually been what's called extirpated or locally extinct in some areas. They've been removed. They no longer survive in Stanley Park, for example. They don't survive in many areas that they survived before because our human activities have displaced them, pushed them out of the way, because we've removed a lot of the habitat they need. They need these forests and these streams in forests. And one of the big threats to them now, even in remote places, in places far from where we typically live, is logging of these old growth forests. So we have to be very careful to protect as much of that old growth ancient forest as possible, because once it's disturbed, that important frog habitat and habitat of many species is removed. And those species that need that habitat for cooling, for providing the moisture and the insects that they eat and all of the other components of their environment is removed, and they can't survive and they can go extinct, which is what happens when all members of a species die out. And we don't want that because they're very important in the environment. They eat insects that are often pests to us that bother us. They keep the numbers of those in check so that they don't cause disruption or harm to the rest of the ecological community or the biological community. And so these are crucially important in the environment. But aside from that, something that I, as a biologist and as somebody who cares about the natural world around us, and something that we can learn wonderfully from First Nations here in Canada and all over the world, that they did spectacularly well for thousands of years, is to care for other species and think of them as truly and biologically two relatives of us. They're kind of like our extended relatives, our cousins, and we treat our family nicely because we care about them. Why not? Even whether they are of any use to us or not, we should show them respect and care for them. And same for frogs. They are related to us. Our ancestors go back many millions of years that we shared with them, but they are our relatives, and we should treat them with respect, whether we perceive them of any use to us or not. But they're wonderful to watch. We shouldn't disturb them. We shouldn't grab them and hold them, but we can see them, we can watch them. And there are wonderful programs in place that help us to be able to report our sightings of frogs so that we can get a better idea of where they live and where they don't. So we know what areas to especially assign protection to. So anyway, that's mostly what I have to say about these. The last thing is that if you're drawing these, you can color them in. And if you want, and something I've been telling other people as much as possible, it helps if you're able to use these drawings in letters that you can send to your MLAs or your MPs, certain government officials that help to formulate policies that protect these species. And if you can write letters to them saying why it's important to you that they get protected, and you can include drawings like this with your letters, that can make an even bigger impact. And you know, they love to receive letters from kids, especially with drawings that they've done like this. So I encourage you to do that. Maybe as a class project, who knows? Anyway, that's what I've got to say. So I'll hand it back to Ascher and Makwala, and thank you very much and I hope you've enjoyed the drawing.
Thank you so much, Julius. And thank you for everyone who attended. If you want to take pictures of your drawings and send them over to us, we put them on our website and we love to see them. Yeah, so thank you, Haichka, Ge Lakasla, Kokaklo, and to Makwala to end.
Yes, thank you, Ascher and Julius. Once again, another awesome webinar, and thank you all the people who've tuned in to participate. Again, these discussions are the baby steps in moving forward in a good way. And like I said, it's working together, in a web, much like the webbed feet of the frog. And I think it's very interesting that they are so sensitive to temperature, and yet they've are some of like the oldest creatures on this planet. I believe they've been around since the dinosaurs. I'm not
even before. Yes.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see pollutants, right?
Yeah, very indicators. Yeah.
And it's like human intervention, right? And you're talking about the old growth forests, and I've said it before, like when our people would build big houses and stuff, we didn't cut down a tree, we'd just take one plank from it, and they go on to live and be homes to birds and bear dens and all that other good stuff. And you can cedar bark strip from them later on, after half a century or so. So there are sustainable ways of doing things, and it's time to work together and rethink how we've been programmed or conditioned. So Gelakasla, and thank you everybody for coming and being a part of these conversations. Again, I come from the Kwakwaka'wakw territories. That's where I'm tuning in from. And, I share this beautiful Vancouver Island with two other nations, the Nuu-chah-nulth and the Coast Salish. And so Gelakasla, Hayam. It was another great day.
Perfect. All right. Enjoy the rest of the day.
You bet. Thanks very much for everybody for attending.